Record. Okay, fine. So here is the so basically there are two disagreements that come together in one law, two separate discussions, they come together in one law. One question is as follows. It's called Shoel Shalom Midat. I'm borrowing without permission, or borrowing without the knowledge of the owner. So I walk down the street, I see your bicycle. I'm not stealing your bicycle, but I want to get on the bicycle, I'll spin around the block, excuse me, I'll come back, I'll give it back to you. So in my intention, I am a shoyel, I am a borrower. That's what I think. Now, the question is not, should I take it? Should I take it? I probably shouldn't take it. But if I took it, am I classified as a thief? Or am I classified as a borrower? Why is that so important? There's a very big difference if I'm classified as a thief or a borrower. The big difference is like this. Say I'm walking down the street, I see your bicycle, I say, you know what, let me get on, I'll take a spin. I know you're in the shul davening, so I'll take a spin. I get onto your bicycle, I drive around the block, I put the bicycle back. Exactly the way it was. Nothing got ruined, nothing got harmed. If I am like a borrower, so the second I put it back, I am done with relationship with this object. I borrowed, I put it back. My liability, my obligation to protect is over. And then it's not my problem anymore. A half an hour later, if it gets stolen, it's not my problem. Why is it not my problem? Because I was a borrower and the term of my borrowing was done. So we're done. If, however, you say, there's no such thing as borrowing without permission. You're borrowing without permission is the fancy way of saying you're a thief. Okay. If you're going to classify me as a thief, so let's replay the same scenario. I jump into the bike, I drive around the block, I put it back exactly where I found it. A half an hour later, it was stolen. If I'm classified as a thief because I borrowed it without permission, then I'm liable for the fact that it was stolen a half an hour later. How come? Because the law is that a thief, once I stole it, I have an obligation to return it to the owner. You're still davening in the shul. I never gave it back to the owner. If I never gave it back to the owner, it's still my liability. And if it was stolen a half an hour after I used it, I am liable to repay, even if it was stolen after I finished using it. So this is a very important discussion. Borrower without permission. You're my friend. I don't think you'll mind. I'm going to take your phone charger, take it, whatever it is, take something. I'm going to put it back. I'm not trying to steal. Steal is the intention to expropriate, to take it for yourself. No, I'm going to put it back. So the question is, you put it back. Now what? Did you finish your obligation? If you're a borrower and you put it back, your liability is done. If you're a thief, then I put it back. My liability is not done until I return it to the owner. That's one disagreement, which is fascinating for itself. There's going to be another disagreement that only once we learn the other disagreement could we come back to that one paragraph of Maimonides that we're trying to tackle today. Go ahead, Richard.
Okay, there's 2 points I want to make. Number one, if you took the bike without permission,
yeah,
but in your mind, you know you're just borrowing it.
Yeah.
There's no theft in your mind.
Yeah.
Second of all, if the owner
So let's stop right here. Are you arguing that therefore what? Therefore, I should be like a thief or not like a thief?
No, you're not a thief because in your mind, you're borrowing it.
Okay, but so I push back for a second. So that's one opinion. One opinion in the Talmud is that borrowing without permission, you're not a thief. But let me push back the other part. The other part is it doesn't really matter what you think, right? You took my stuff without permission. So it doesn't matter what your thought is that you want to return it. But right now, you are a thief. If you're a thief, the thief has an obligation to return it to the owner. Until you return it to the owner, you're still liable. So the second, so you're arguing one opinion. That is, it all depends on the opinion, on the perspective of the one taking it.
But there's one factor. There's one factor. If the owner does not know the bike is missing and you return it and he never knows that it was gone, then you're not liable for anything. If he does
Okay, so
not
you're
recognize
touching
it.
upon the second argument. You're touching upon the second argument, but they're touching upon the second argument. But before we even get there, the argument is that you never gave it back to me. If you never gave it back to me, your liability does not end. So if I'm giving an example, I'm giving this example intentionally because you'll see why I'm giving this example. You left your bike, the owner left the bike in front of the show outside. You'll see later why I'm specifically giving this example. The owner left the bike outside. You got onto the bike, or I got onto you left your bike outside, you went inside to daven. I got on the bike, I drove around the block and put it outside. There's no way you could say that this is called giving it back to you, because it doesn't fit any of the criteria of giving it back to you. I didn't give it back to your possession. I didn't put it in your property. It's not protected. So you'll see in a minute that we're going to head right into your discussion in a minute. But for right now, the point is there was no act of returning. If there's no act of returning, according to the guy who says I'm still a thief, then I'm still liable. But I see your point, because you're making the argument of the first opinion, which is whether or not I'm a thief should depend on my intention of returning. And that's a beautiful svara, what we call. Svara means a line of logic. It's very logical what you're saying. But you can also look at it from the other way and say, I took the bike, my intention is absolutely irrelevant. We're looking at the objective facts. Objective facts, I took something without permission, I am a thief, I have to return it. And if I can't show of a moment that I returned it to the owner. Okay. Now, but I want to go into Richard's point, because Richard's point is indeed the next argument. Okay. There's a separate disagreement. The separate disagreement is nothing to do with borrowing. It has to do with all cases, a thief. Let's say you're davening, and when you're davening, you put your wallet next to your tefillin bag. I walk in, I say, the guy's davening. He's so engrossed in prayer. Maybe I'll steal $50. Why not? He's not going to know. So I take $50 out of your wallet, and I go home. I get home, I start slicing my tomatoes for breakfast, and I start feeling very guilty. How did I take $50 from Richard? Terrible. Okay, you know what? I'm going to go return it. So I go return it. I go to shul. You're still in the middle of davening. I take the money. I slip it right back into your wallet. You have no idea that it was taken. You have no idea that it was returned. So there's a disagreement whether or not that is considered return. In other words, in the language of the Talmud, do you need the knowledge of the owner to be classified as a return? Now, in that second case, it's not a case that nothing happened later, but there's a mitzvah to return a lost object. Did I fulfill the mitzvah if I put it back in your wallet without telling you? Some people say yes, some people say no. Now,
But it wasn't lost. It wasn't lost. You knew you were a thief when you took it, so it was not lost.
Yeah, but you're right. It's a different case, but it's a separate question. The question is, let's assume I'm a thief. Now I want to return. If I return without your knowledge, is that considered a return? And again, here, there is also a disagreement. But you see the difference between case one and case two. One of the differences, the case I was referring to in case one, you return the bicycle in front of the shul. That is not a case of returning it. It's not returning it because I didn't put it back into your possession. But with the $50 in the wallet, I literally went and put it in your possession. I put it in your wallet. If I'm a pickpocketer, I actually I could put it back in your pants. Okay. But then there still is a disagreement. If I didn't tell you that I'm returning it, is it considered returning? In other words, we had two disagreements. Disagreement number one, Shayel Shalamidat, Hebrew for borrowing without permission. Am I classified as a borrower? Which means one of the ramifications are that eventually the liability ends, or am I classified as a thief? which means if later it was stolen, I'm still obligated. That's disagreement number one. Disagreement number two, if I'm returning, I stole something, a separate case. I stole something and I'm returning. Does the owner have to know that I returned it for it to be considered returning? One answer is we're looking at the objective. I put it back in your wallet, I returned it. Another answer is no, that's not called returning. The other opinion is it's not called returning because to return, the owner has to know that you're returning it to him. So that is two separate disagreements. Right over here, we're going to have a case where they are going to overlap, and we're going to need to think about both these disagreements.
Well, I just want to interject the point again, reinforce what I say. If you know you're doing something intentionally to steal, like you gave me your second example, you're right. You know you're the thief. You're a thief. You committed a crime.
Right.
If you know in your mind, because in your mind, everything exists in your mind, right and wrong, good and bad, it all exists in your mind. So if you're borrowing it, okay, the guy's not around, he's in shul, I want to go for a little while on a bike, I'm just going to borrow it. I'm not a thief, I'm just because I'm going to return it. So subsequently, that removes me from any guilt because I'm following it.
That is one opinion in the Talmud. Let me see if I remember which. I'm looking at my notes to see whose opinion that is. That is clearly one opinion in the Talmud.
The Rambam.
I remember who says it. It's one of the rabbis, but it's not the majority. But do you see that I could push back and say, my friend, don't touch any of my stuff. And if you touch stuff,
that's a whole different thing. You're already giving explicit.
Okay, but there's no explicit. Okay, so there's no explicit, but it's implicit. In other words, if you would see the perspective that says, don't touch anyone else's stuff without permission. If you do, you're a thief. I could make that argument. I'm not saying it's the only argument, but I could make that argument. I can make the argument. What do you mean you're taking it on return? Like, let's say you bought a Lamborghini. You bought a Lamborghini. I say, I like your Lamborghini. You know what? I'm going to take it upstate. I'll come back. I'm going to return it. What's the problem? Right? You say, what are you talking about? How can you take someone's Lamborghini without permission? But the other side is, I'm not a thief, I'm a borrower, so treat me as a borrower. Again, I see two opinions here. I'm not saying one is right, one is wrong. I see two opinions here. Do you see my counterpoint? Could I take you on a spin to Miami and I'll come back when I'm done? I'll return it.
Ask Mushka what she thinks.
Mushka, what do you think? If I borrow without permission, should I be classified as a thief? And then my liability extends even after I return it? Or even after I finish using it? Or should I be classified as a borrower? And as soon as I finish, let's say you take your brother, Mushka's brother just got a new electric scooter. Okay, so you take his electric scooter without permission and you put it back and then it gets stolen. Are you a thief or are you a borrower? If you're a borrower, then you're not liable because it got stolen because you borrowed it. Now it's your brother. It's just borrowing. What do you think? Mushka says thief. Okay, fine. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Well, I'm kind of with Mushka on the first one, but I'm also looking at the second one as a problematic. I have more problem with the second case because you're stealing without, you definitely with intention of stealing, and then you put it back. You put it back because you kind of had the regret, but you didn't do it to Shuva because you didn't tell the owner.
So let's be clear. Second case, there is no question that I'm a thief. There's no question of the fact I'm a thief. There's no question that I have to return it. And there's no question is that there's a mitzvah to return. The question is, did I return the money if you had no idea that it was taken and returned? Did I
would say no. I would say no because you didn't tell
the owner. You have to tell the owner.
Right. Okay. Otherwise, it's not a teshuva.
So teshuva is already a different thing. You're right. Forget about the teshuva aspect. Let's look just at the monetary aspect. The monetary aspect. There's a legal obligation. Forget about the teshuva right now. If I steal money, there's a mitzvah to return it. The heishiva tagzela, I have to return it. We're asking a very simple question. Is this considered return? Now, there's a broader discussion in the Talmud. I don't want to get into it right now, but let's say it's an animal. Let's say I steal your goat, and then I put it back back in your, what do they call it? In your, not your barn, yeah, your barn, but back into the group. What do they call the group? A herd, back into the herd, whatever. There, we say, no, that's not considered putting it back. Why not? Because once, it's very funny, goats are like kids. Once you teach them to get out of the gates, then they're liable to run away on their own. They realize there's a big world out there. So because I showed the goats that there's actually more to life than this little herd, now the goat was going to want to and try to escape again. So if the owner doesn't know that this goat is prone to escaping, he won't give it extra protection. So that's a movable object, that's an animal. But the question becomes about money. I put money back in your wallets. Is it considered that I returned the money? Or forget about the teshuva aspect. I'm talking about the obligation to return the monetary. I took $50. I have an obligation to put back $50. Do I have to tell you that I'm putting it back to be considered as if I absolved my monetary obligation? Here too, there's a disagreement whether or not, in the language of the Talmud, whether or not you need the da'at bailim, you need the opinion of you need the knowledge of the owner. Yes, Mushka, please.
If you put money back in the owner's
Wallet.
right? You go back home, you still feel guilty.
Okay.
That you're a thief.
Right.
But if you return and you tell him and he knows and he forgives you, then you don't feel guilty.
But maybe I'm embarrassed.
But if you feel guilty after, then you're still.
Okay, so we're not talking about guilt. So go to your therapist. So Mishka's saying the fact that I may still feel guilty means that I still didn't return it. On the other hand, people could say, I'm sure people would say, don't feel guilty. I put it back. Put it back.
You're still gonna feel guilty. You're still gonna think that once I stole, but you return it, then.
But maybe returning it without the knowledge of that itself is the question. Is returning without the knowledge of the owner, is that considered returning?
No,
One
you still feel like you did
One
something.
opinion says it's considered returning, nothing to feel guilty about. You don't agree, so you agree with the second opinion.
Rabbi, I got a question.
Yes.
I'm not interrupting Mushki, am I? Is she finished?
No, she's finished. Yes.
Okay. Put on your Chumash hat for a minute now.
Yes.
When Joseph put the money back into his brother's bags
Yes.
and he sent it back,
Yeah.
that money belonged to Pharaoh, it didn't belong to Joseph. Did he steal that money from Pharaoh and give it to them? And the fact that they came back with the money, does that resolve him from the fact that he
That's
took
a good
Pharaoh?
question. That's a good point. So Joseph gives them the money. Maybe it's considered he didn't tell them. Forget about the. Okay, I don't know what Joseph's relationship with Pharaoh is. I imagine that he gets a salary from the Pharaoh. In other words, the Pharaoh, if he let him run the economy, he lets him take a couple of dollars. That's what I would imagine. But I think an interesting point that you raise is when he gives it to the brothers without their knowledge, is it considered as if it's theirs because they didn't have knowledge? And there in the story, Joseph brothers come back with the money. They want to give it to Joseph. Joseph doesn't take it. He says, it's yours. God gave it to you. Right? So that's an interesting point. You give somebody a gift without telling them, do they acquire it? Yeah, that's certainly related.
Yeah, but it's different in a way, because when you take the money, there is a risk that you may use it and or do something with it, and owner has no idea about it. So that's why that case that you describe is problematic, not only from teshuva point of view, but even from the monetary point.
There's a different question if I'm allowed to take it, and the answer to we're asking if I took it, am I a thief? So there's a different question, and I specifically avoided that question because I don't want to get into that question. But there's a separate question: is am I allowed to take the bicycle? Probably the answer is it depends. If you assume that the owner is somebody that you have a very close relationship with, and he always lets you ride the bike whenever you want, then most people say it's likely that you are allowed to borrow the bike because you have that type of relationship and you're always sharing your things with that person. If there's no reason to assume that the guy would let you, then you're not allowed to. So that's a separate question. Am I allowed to take the bike? But even if I am allowed to take the bike, the question is, what form of liability do I assume? And it's possible that I could be classified as either a borrower or as a thief. Even if I'm allowed to take it, I'm still a thief. I took it without permission. And again, what's the difference if I'm a borrower or a thief? It's not just how I classify myself to make me feel guilty. It's when does my liability end? The thief's, the borrower's liability ends when he finishes using it. The thief's liability ends when he returns it. Well, what's returning? Okay, that's our second disagreement.
You made a good point, Rabbi. If you take something, here's the key word, permission. If you take some, even if you know you're going to borrow and return it, if you take something without permission, this is the operative word, then you are guilty of something, whether it's theft or something, you're guilty of something.
So
Without-
you may be guilty, but how are you classified in the law? You have my bike. You finished using it, or I have your bike. I finished using it. I put it back. What just happened? Am I a borrower or am I a thief? Now, borrowing without permission. In the beginning, you were very comfortable classifying me as someone who borrowed without permission. Does that make me a thief? No, a thief is someone who's taking and with the intention to keep it. Here,
Right.
I'm only borrowing. I'm borrowing without permission. So you're going to tell me that I'm a thief? And again, there's two ways to look at it. Before you advocated position one, now you're advocating position two. That just proves to me that first of all you're thinking, and number two, that there's two ways to look at this, right? Which is what makes it an interesting case.
Yeah. That's where my joke came in. I told you before, Rabbi's teaching Cheder, and he asked a question to three of the students. One
Yeah.
student an answer, and he goes, "You're right." He goes to the second student, and you're right. The third student goes, "Wait a minute, they both can't be right." And he goes, "And you're right too."
Right.
So I don't know how they would handle it. How would it? I don't know. It's a good scenario that you presented to us, and I don't think there's a definitive. Although Hashem knows that if you borrowed it and you didn't steal it, that Hashem will not hold you guilty.
Well, let's see. So it's Hashem. There's also a monetary issue. So drum roll. You want the Jewish law on this matter? Drum roll. The law is as follows. The law is going to be, and we'll read it in Maimonides in a minute. The law is, if I borrow something without permission, I'm classified as a thief. And therefore, I am liable even if, so I'm a thief, and to make Vicky happy, to return means you have to tell, the owner has to know that you're returning it for it to be considered returning. So let's repeat that in the context of the scenario that Maimonides puts forward, because we're talking about laws of borrowing. We're talking about laws of entrusted objects, of guardians. So Richard is going on vacation. So Richard says to me, here's my object, put it in your house, but I know your house is busy because a lot of kids running around. So put it in this corner, southeast corner. I say, no problem. I put it in the southeast corner. Now, what happens with this barrel, whatever this object, we learned in the last couple of weeks that I have to use some items, some objects have to be used so they don't get ruined. If it's a scroll, you have to open it up so it should ear out. If it's a garment, you have to open it up so it should ear out. So I'm allowed to take it out and use it and spread it out, we said, for the benefit of the object, but I'm not allowed to do it for my benefits. Okay, what happens if I violate the law? Richard said, I'm going to Florida. Could you leave my object in the southwest east corner of your house? I said, yes, I'm putting the object there. Then Richard goes home. Then Richard goes to Florida. Then I decide, you know what? I want to use this object. I'm going to use it and return it. I'm not a thief. I'm borrowing without permission. So I take it and I use it. Then I put it back exactly where Richard told me to put it. So in some cases, there's an argument to be made. I returned it to Richard. Richard's not here, but I put it in the space that he wants it to be. It's almost like I leased him that corner of my house, figuratively speaking. Nevertheless, the law is, if it breaks afterward for any reason, I am liable. Why? Because you borrowed without permission. You're not a borrower, you're a thief. And if you're a thief, your liability does not end when you put it back in the corner. Your liability ends when you return the object to the owner. but the owner's not here. But you say, what do you mean? You could return to the space. No, here we follow the second disagreement, we follow the opinion that to return means to have dat ba'alim, to have the opinion of the owner. So that's how these disagreements come together. I'm going to share the screen. We're going to read Maimonides inside, and we'll get a little taste. Okay, here we go. Section 9. The following rules apply when a person entrusts a jug to a colleague. So Richard has a jug. He's going out of town. He wants me to guard his jug. Okay. Regardless of whether or not the owner of the jug designated a specific place where he could put the jug down. We're going to say, we're going to say, even if the guy gave me, even if I gave a specific, even if I said to Richard, I'm putting your jug in a very specific place in the southeast corner of the house. Nevertheless, if the watchman moved the jug for his own purposes, right? I say, oh, my guests are coming. I don't have a tablecloth big enough. Why don't I put the jug in the center of the house? And I'll put a plate on top. I'll put the serving food on top of the jug. Am I allowed to do that? No. That's considered borrowing without permission. In other words, that's considered theft. So then, therefore, if the watchman moved the jug for his own purpose, he is liable, whether the jug was broken in his hands or after he returned it to the place designated for it. That's the big idea here. If it breaks while I'm holding it, of course I'm liable. Even after I put it back in the corner, you say, okay, my borrowing is over. I'm not liable anymore. Say, no, you're not a borrower. You are. The term is not up because you're a thief, and a thief is not absolved until he returns it, and you didn't return it. Even though I returned it to the place where I told Richard it's going to be, yes, but there's no dot by them. There's no knowledge of the owner. The owner doesn't know it was returned, so it cannot be classified as return. Okay. The second case is much simpler. If he moves it for the sake of the jug, I move the barrel for the sake of the jug, which I'm allowed to do. In fact, I am supposed to do. He is not liable, whether the jug was broken in his hand or whether it was broken after it was put down in a different place. That's more obvious. The big chidush, the novelty, is the first case. And like I said, the first case looks just like one statement of Maimonides, but in reality, it's really a combination of two disagreements. If I borrow without permission, am I classified as a borrower or as a thief? The answer is thief. If I return something, but the owner doesn't know that I returned it, is it classified as returning? The answer is no. So together we have the case here where Richard gives me a jug, goes on vacation. I want to use the jug for my own purpose, which I'm not allowed to do. If I do it, I move the jug, I use it, I put it back. It's like I gave it back to Richard, because even though I didn't put it back in Richard's house, but I gave it to the place where Richard told me to put it, in a specific corner. That's the meaning of Maimonides' words. Regardless if he specified a space, even if he specified a space where I should put it, nevertheless, I would be liable because I'm classified as a thief. And to be a thief, if I'm a thief, I have to return it to the owner. And if the owner doesn't know I returned it to him, then I didn't return it to him. That's the story in short. Short piece of Maimonides, two disagreements layered upon. And to me, this was fun. I've been waiting for this piece for a while here. So thank you all for listening. Thank you, Mishka, for joining. Thank you, Richard, for joining. Thank you, Vicky, for joining. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi. I had a feeling that that's the right thing to do, but I couldn't put it in the words.
Right.
But I think the beauty of this piece is that you consider the other person's opinion.
Yes.
So you're encouraged to consider the other person, the owner's opinion.
Yes.
And that's the beauty that of that case that combines both.
That's the guy's perspective.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. This was fun. Okay.
I got a little addendum to put onto the story you just
Go
said.
ahead, please.
Not
Go
the
ahead.
story, but from Maimonides. Code of Jewish law says if you borrow something from another person, you should take better care of that property, that object, than you take care of your own.
Nice.
Property.
Nice. Yeah, that's clear. That's clear. The question is, how long does that obligation continue? When
There
I'm
you go.
using it, can I say I'm done? I'm not longer liable. So if I borrowed it with permission, then when I finish using it, my liability ends. If I borrowed it without permission, then when I finish using it, my liability does not end. That's the idea here. So I thought
But
this was,
even if you can't use it, if you're not supposed to, they just say, Rabbi, you come in, Richard, I want you to hold this, up, this fork for me. This is a very special fork. It's a
Yeah.
gold-plated fork. Don't use it. Just hold it for me. I want it back.
right.
I'm obligated to take more careful and more caution with that fork than my own forks.
Correct. Correct.
So that's just the thought I would add that little, yeah. Okay, that's it for me today.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Be well. Take care.
Okay.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.